Before we dive into today's episode, I want to sit with a question that we don't ask enough. Who is shaping the image of Africa and who should be? For so long, our stories were filtered through lenses that never belonged to us. Our culture was misunderstood, our beauty was minimized, and our creativity was boxed into cliches. Like Africa being reduced to huts and safaris, dark skin being labeled unprofessional, or our traditional clothes being treated as costumes instead of couture, or our languages being silenced or mocked, and our innovations being ignored until someone outside the continent repackaged them. But today's guest is part of a new generation changing that narrative with intention, depth, and artistry. Her name is Isha, the creator of Afrique Noire Magazine, a platform with over 61,000 people watching, listening, and learning from how she represents the continent. But what she's building is more than a magazine. It's a cultural archive, a love letter, a mirror for Africans everywhere who've been wanting to see themselves reflected with dignity, luxury, and truth. Afrique Noire blends fashion, poetry, identity, and storytelling, not just to showcase Africa, but to redefine how Africa is imagined. And in this conversation, we trace her journey, the roots that shaped her, the moment she realized our narratives were being mishandled, the challenges she fought through to build this platform, and the vision she has for African storytelling moving forward. So, let's get into it. This is They Lied About Africa, and I'm your host, Numbe, and today we're sitting down with Isha, a woman who isn't just telling Africa's story, she's restoring it. So many of us in the diaspora growing up feeling in between, connected to our culture, but also shaped by places that we don't fully understand us. And a lot of the work we create later in life comes from trying to make sense of that dual identity. So with that in mind, before Afrique Noire ever existed, who were you and what parts of your upbringing or identity shaped the way you see the continent and the responsibility you feel to tell African stories today? Was there a career path you were pursuing prior to creating Afrique Noire, and how did you get to where you are now?
Yeah, that's an amazing question. I always get asked this question, and it's an interesting story because prior to finding out what my passion was and figuring out what I wanted to do, I really wanted to be a lawyer. And that was the path that I was going down. I grew up wanting to be a lawyer because it was the only thing that I could think of that would allow me to still be in like human rights, because that was like really my passion. Human rights specifically in Africa, to be more on point was my passion. I wanted to work in Africa. I knew that was a passion of mine. So I think from a very young age, I knew that's where I wanted to be, and I wanted to be in that space. It was just a matter of how. And, growing up in an immigrant household, I immigrated here when I was young. My family, my parents immigrated here at a later age in life. So they were very much pushing me toward, being a lawyer or a doctor.
Right.
Those were kind of the two things that were put in my path.
Exactly.
So I think for me, it was more like, how do I find something that I can do that will make my parents happy, and then also find something that will make me happy. So I was like, okay, I will be a lawyer. That was kind of what I decided. Obviously, that didn't happen, thankfully. And that was an unraveling in of itself. It was around COVID when I graduated college,
Right,
and I started having more of those conversations. And I think COVID really allowed a lot of us to have those conversations about what we were doing, what we were pursuing, and why. And I realized my why was not authentic. My why was not genuine. I was doing things that I thought I had to do rather than really sitting and figuring out what it is that I wanted to do. So thankfully, I had people in my life that pushed me toward figuring out what that thing was that I wanted to do, and what spaces existed for me to really explore outside of just law. And I was able to do that before committing to something that I really did not want to do.
Yeah. Well, that's a beautiful story. In fact, funny enough, I think we spoke about this over the phone when I was getting to know you a little bit more, but I'm also like on that path to law as well. And sometimes you have that moment where you're asking yourself, are you doing this for the sake of, other people? Or are you doing it really for yourself? Is this something that you genuinely want to do? So, but I'm glad that you were able to have, the discernment and kind of realize that like this isn't for me and I'm gonna go pursue like another path. And
Yeah.
it's really great also that you had people around you at the time who were fully supportive of that. Sometimes it can feel a little stressful or like a lot of pressure at times when you are trying to, you know, maybe make your parents happy, but then also make yourself happy, and you get stuck in this in between, and you want to go down a path that is like going to protect you in some way, shape, or form financially and give you stability. But I feel like not a lot of people talk about unconventional career paths, so it makes that
Yeah.
time feel very isolating and things of that sort. So
Yeah.
the fact that you had people around you who were willing to push you towards that direction and help you realize, you know, that there are so many ways to get to your goal or to get to your passion, you know, that's something to be really grateful for.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it was also, this idea that I had to do it right away, right? Like I had
Mm,
to go to law school right away. It was almost this like pressure. And that's not to say that maybe later on down the line I won't go to law school, but I want it to come from a place of, oh, this is something that I really want to do because it aligns with my soul's purpose,
right,
rather than
right.
this is something that I'm doing because I'm scared that there's nothing else out there for me, or I'm scared and I need to make money, or I want the title of, being a lawyer. A lot of that is
Mm,
also very ego based, and I can totally recognize that in me. And that's not the case for everyone, but I
right.
mean, that's just how I was conditioned. So if I do go to law school, which it might happen, I want it to very much come from a place of ease and not feel like, oh my gosh, is this what I
Exactly.
want to do? Is this not what I want to do? Like, I want it
Yeah.
to feel like the right decision. So, yeah.
Yeah. No, definitely. And law school is one of those things that you have to really take your time um, before jumping right into. Like I mentioned again, law school is one of those conventional career paths, but unconventional career paths aren't spoken about as much. So you
There you go.
feel like you
Yeah.
have to just jump into going straight to law school, which I almost did, right? But I had to take the
Mm-hmm.
time to also ask myself my why. Hence why I pivoted over to the podcast. Hence why you pivoted over to what you're doing now,
Mm-hmm.
because it's a financial commitment and it's a time commitment, and it is not
Yeah.
easy, and it's 3 years of your life, and you really have to
Yeah.
ask yourself if you're willing to do that now or later, which
Mm-hmm.
is why, like gap years are so important. So I'm glad that
Yeah.
you're taking the time to figure that out, and I think like because you took the time to really figure that out, when you do, if you do go to law school, it's going to feel more intentional, and
Totally.
it's going to help you, because law school is hard, but I feel like what helps with the difficulty of it is knowing your why and the passion, the fact that you took the time to figure out what it was that you were passionate about and why you're here. It's going to make those days that you don't want to get up out of bed to go to class worth it. It's going to be your why. There is probably basketball players who are making millions of dollars right now, but do you think they're going to wake up every single day 5 a.m. to go to training? No, but they're going to do it anyways because they're passionate about it, right? So I think it's
Mm-hmm.
just one of those things. But yeah, no, that's amazing. Now I want to move on to the next question. So everyone who usually builds something for Africa, whether that's you're in the United States and you're building something based off of African culture and values, or you build something on the ground, they usually had a moment, or from what I understand, like some sort of a frustration or realization, or even like a heartbreak that pushed them to start that, right? So what was the moment or experience that made you realize that there was a gap in how African culture, fashion, and stories were being portrayed, and that you needed to create something to fill that gap?
Yeah. It's a great question. I cannot pinpoint the exact time, but I know my experience, and I know, moving to the United States, like I said, I moved here when I was relatively young. I, grew up in Southern California. I was surrounded by a lot of people that did not look like me,
Of
right?
course,
Like
yeah.
I was one of two black kids in my school all the way up until high school. I was the only African. And that was in a small space, but then you
Mm-hmm.
think about it more globally, and you think about it even in the United States. Like I was not seeing people that looked like me represented anywhere in the media, right?
Yeah.
And when people did speak about Africa, it was about poverty, it was about war, it was about slavery.
Exactly.
And I witnessed this and I experienced it in school. Like whenever we talked about Africa, it was like watch this, and we were watching Roots, for example, and it was depicting, slavery, which, yes, of course, it's a part of our history,
Most
but
definitely.
I also know how important it is, how conditioning is important when you're in school and what you experience and what you hear and what you learn. And I think even for me, granted, I was born in the Gambia, I lived, in Gambia. So even coming to the US, I still knew what my experience was and I still knew what home felt like.
Yeah,
But even going through middle school and high school, it was like, that was the conditioning that even I was undergoing,
of
right? So
course. Yeah.
imagine somebody who has no idea what Africa is like, and all they see are these a penny a day commercials and videos of, poverty and war. And that is what I grew up in the United States seeing. And although I was really young, I feel like there was always a part of me that was like, this is not accurate in the way that it's being portrayed, right?
Yeah.
And I think that is something that frustrated me because I felt like I was always having to defend, right? I was
Yeah.
like,
Yeah.
well, yes, there is war, but
Of
there's also
course.
war in other countries. Yes, there
Right.
is poverty, but there's also poverty in other continents and in other countries. So
For sure.
why is that our story, right? And I think, in starting this magazine and starting this platform, that was what I was trying to really focus on, was not even just for people outside of Africa or people that weren't African, but even for like diaspora and Black folks, in general. It's like,
Right.
do we know where we come from? Do we know, the richness and the legacy and the beauty that's within our home?
Of course.
And if we don't, can we learn it and can we start having more pride about where we come from? Because I think that sense of pride can really help shape the way that we view ourselves as well, right?
Yeah.
Living in a nation, whether you live in the US or, in Europe or Canada, like wherever you live, like Blackness is always perceived a certain way. Being
Of
African is
course.
always perceived a certain way. So that was, I think, my why, was like, how do I create a space where someone that either doesn't know anything about Africa or somebody who's disconnected from their roots because of so many things that have happened, not to their own fault, how can they reconnect and have a sense of pride when they think about Africa? So I think it was a culmination of years of growing up in the United States,
Yeah.
of not feeling represented anywhere,
Yeah.
and of also just seeing things that I'm like, this is just not. It's not okay to depict an entire continent in the way that Africa has been depicted for
Yeah.
as many years. It's
Of
not okay
course.
to only show one side of a coin and not show what's on the other. And I think that is what me and so many other creatives, right? Like Afrique Noire exists, but we also have so many other creatives and magazines and platforms that are doing the same work. But,
Most definitely.
anytime somebody comments like, oh my gosh, I didn't know this, or wow,
Yeah.
Africa is so beautiful, like
Yeah.
that is what me and my team do it for.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, I love everything you said. I feel like I can relate to that on a whole nother level too. Africa is not a monolith, right? And even myself, I grew up in a small town in Massachusetts that wasn't diverse at all. It wasn't until like the third, fourth grade where I saw like another black girl in like my entire school. So it was hard growing up, but it was just more like it felt normal. Like it kind of became my normal. And yeah, even the things I was fed about Africa. If we talked about Africa, I actually have an episode coming out on this week. But if we talk about Africa, we talk about it from the context of, like you said, at least within the United States context, like slavery, Jim Crow, civil rights era, or if you talk about it, and like about the continent itself, maybe you talk about Egypt for like, a couple of weeks, but there's not much talk spoken about, Africa in general. And I think that's like become detrimental. You get conditioned to believe that Africa is this monolith. You get conditioned to believe that these commercials that you see being depicted of a kid who has their clothes ripped and they're covered in dust and they're crying, like every single person is basically living that kind of life in Africa, and that is completely untrue, and it's damaging, right? Because it's like saying that the United States is completely perfect. No, we have homeless people. We have people who are going through a lot of things, and we have the same thing is happening back home, where we have areas that are very developed and we have also areas that are very underdeveloped, So I think it's so important that like you were able to recognize that. You know, it took me a while myself. I think when I went back, so I was born in the United States, but when I went back home for the first time, I was like 10, I believe. And I was like, whoa. Like, I don't know what I was expecting. I don't know if I was expecting to see a lion as soon as I got off the plane, but like, I was like, Africa is not like, you know, I've heard it spoken about in school, and that really stuck with me growing up. Even though I went there for like 30 days my first time, I really wanted to go back. I was so connected to it, and I was just like realizing the discrepancies that existed between what I was told and what I was seeing. And I think after some time, I was like getting really frustrated myself too. And I think
Yeah.
that's what led me to create this podcast. It's literally called "They Lied About Africa." Like,
Yeah, no,
you know?
I love the podcast name. Yeah. And I oftentimes I say, because I think this is a conversation that, whenever I'm on a podcast, I get asked a lot. It's, and I think something that can be said is that we're not trying to erase that, right? Like, we're not trying to say Africa isn't stricken by war
Oh yeah,
and,
because there's issues on the
poverty. And
ground.
hey, there
Yeah,
is absolutely. Another conversation can be had about where did that stem from and
yeah,
what, who is
absolutely.
to blame and where are we, about that. That's another conversation.
Hmm.
But I think the beauty in what we explore in noir is that, despite a lot of these things, creatives are still creating, like
Yeah.
there are people who are still creating despite that, and there's still beauty to be found. And I
Hmm.
think art is so nuanced, right? And I don't
Yes,
necessarily feel like art means pretty and shiny and
I agree.
or even the term beauty. I think it's
Hmm.
nuanced, I think it's subjective, and i
Hmm.
i feel like a lot of the creatives that we work with, they find a way to create through their soul, and it tells
Absolutely.
a story. And we're huge about storytelling because we think
Yes.
that every artist and every creative have a different lived experience, right?
Hmm.
Africa is a huge continent. It's a
Yes,
huge
it is.
continent. And, I think sometimes even when, we just say Africa, 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 I'm like, yes, but, there's so many different lived experiences in each country, or even in one country, people have
Yeah.
different lived experiences.
Yeah.
But I think art is a way that we can kind of, despite those differences, come together and view something and feel something.
Yeah.
And I think it's a common denominator amongst a lot of African creatives, and that's really
Yeah.
what we're trying to show. So it's not a matter of saying like
Mm.
Africa is perfect and we're fine, look at all of this beautiful art
We
that's
have our
being created,
issues.
forget about everything else. it's
Mm.
it's like, no, both can coexist, and we
Of
can look at
course.
both and we can say, here it is, it's not perfect, but here's the truth. And I
Mm.
think that's what I really love about your podcast is like, it's not like there have been lies, about who we are and who the continent is
Yeah.
as a whole. And
Yeah.
I think it's important to showcase the truth, and the truth is
Of course.
nuanced, the truth is not perfect.
Yes.
But the truth is the truth, right? And then from
Of course.
there, you can move knowing that
Mm.
you know the truth, but otherwise it
Yeah.
just feels like propaganda.
Yeah, no, I completely understand. It's why on
Yeah.
my podcast I have like I divided it into pillars like reclaiming the African story, diaspora and
Hmm.
belonging, Africa now, and essentially as much as I talk about the amazing things that are happening on the ground, I also talk about the not so great things that are happening on the ground. But
Yeah.
like you said, like it's very nuanced. Like you can't
Hmm.
just kind of put this one perspective out there and allow it to be the norm. No, because there are other things
Hmm.
that are happening. We can't completely neglect that. And a really
Yeah.
large aspect of my podcast is like motivating those within the diaspora to reconnect and reinvest back home some way, whether that's emotionally or through art or physically building something on the ground or building something here that represents where they come
Yeah.
from. But it's just like you have to do it with in mind what is going on the ground, right?
Hmm. Hmm.
You have to understand the good things that are happening on the ground. You have to understand the bad things that are happening on the ground. You have to understand
Hmm.
how we got to the good and to the bad, right? So I
Hmm.
try to be very nuanced myself with that in that way. I guess like it's a form of art, if one were to say too.
It is. It
Um,
is.
but
Yeah,
yeah,
absolutely.
but yeah,
Hmm.
that's really great. My next question is that in a world that moves really fast with TikTok and Instagram Reels and very quick, short fed content, choosing a magazine feels very intentional, right?
Hmm.
And you're trying to create something that people are able to sit and resonate with and that is permanent. I would like to know, why did you decide to choose a magazine as your medium for
Yeah.
storytelling?
Yeah.
And what does this, I guess I would think it's like a little bit slower, but more curated format allow you to express about African identity that short form content cannot?
Yeah, it's a great question and it's so timely. We're finalizing our second issue right now, and I had to write, my founder's note that we have at the end of every issue, and that
Yes.
essentially, was the theme, was the art of slowing down.
Yes. Yes.
And yes, it was very intentional. It was very intentional. I knew, and we have social media, right? Like when we use social media, it's one of our biggest platforms, but at the heart of everything is this curated piece that we create, and put together, and the interviews that we do, and the story that we tell. And it's very intentional.
Yes.
I feel like on social media, there's this level of disconnect, right? That I think is a lot of people try to like really feel connected on social media, but I think inherently the way that social media is, it's so hard to connect, right? Like you can
Agreed.
watch one thing that's like, you watch it and maybe you feel connected to that, and you scroll and you're in a completely different space, and then you scroll again and it's something new.
Of
So
course.
there's no chance to just sit and like reflect on what it is that you just saw, or what it is that you just witnessed, right? Like as soon as a video is done, the other one starts playing, right?
Yeah.
There's
Yeah.
so many things vying for your attention that I
Most
just think it's
definitely.
almost impossible to really practice the art of looking, the art of looking and seeing and feeling.
Of course.
And that is really what I wanted to do. I wanted to intentionally curate a space where
Yes.
African art and African creatives could be witnessed, like truly witnessed, not just, scrolled through on social media. And, I think we curate our Instagram in a way as well that it's like you can take your time and really look at the art and
Yeah.
read the caption and learn about the creatives,
Yeah.
if you want. But the magazine was intentional because I wanted something tangible. I
Yeah.
wanted something that people could have, in their living room. And when people come and visit, they can sit down and take a look at it as well. I wanted
Of
something that
course.
somebody could sit down and really look through and sit with it and read it again. And nothing else is like scrambling for your attention. It's just this thing that you're looking at and this experience that you're having in this moment. And I
Yeah.
think that is really the beauty of print. And, when I was starting this, there were lots of people that were like, do people read magazines anymore? Like, are you sure you
Yeah.
want to do this? Is this a
Yeah.
viable
Yeah.
business? Like, and it wasn't coming from a place of like, meanness. It was just a valid question, because the
Right.
day and age that we live in is that nobody wants to sit down and read anything, right?
Of
Because we've just
course.
been conditioned to scroll on social media, and like if a video was longer than a minute, I'm not watching it. I'm not reading that article. It's so long, right? That's like that's unfortunately what has
Right.
happened because of social media. But I also know that, our audience, our niche audience, are people that want to escape that, are people who want to put their phones down and connect, are people who want to really sit down and enjoy a piece of work, right? That
Yeah.
we've spent so many months putting together, and
Yeah.
really touching and feeling and looking at the beautiful photos and reading and immersing themselves in an entirely different world that's not
Yeah.
on their screens.
Exactly.
So to be completely honest, our magazine is not for everybody. I would hope that everybody would want to, have that experience. But I also know that the people that want to have that experience are the people that really appreciate art and appreciate the art of holding something tangible and experiencing that.
Yeah.
And that's who, we create for. So yes, it was intentional. Yes, we're going to continue to make print magazines. And yes, I do think that there's an audience for it, because I do really see this shift away from constant scrolling and returning back
Yeah.
to, just sitting down and really reading something, and having that experience. And, we try to make our magazine as entertaining as possible. It's great.
Yeah.
So, yeah, it was very intentional. And we hope that, we can continue to do that. And there are people who really want to experience that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, that's beautiful. And I commend you from being so brave enough to walk away from constantly adhering to the societal norm of what society is deemed acceptable for the sake of like your business, right? I think
Yeah.
it's so important to do your own lane, and I think you will get your audience from that. And I completely agree. I was on TikTok this morning for 30 minutes. I cannot tell you a single video I watched, to be honest with you,
Exactly.
right?
Yeah.
But it's
Hmm.
so important that we start incorporating in our life in a way like being able to sit down and consume long form content and deeply analyze and critically think, and allowing that to also just fuel our next source of information,
Yeah.
and to allow us to be on this cycle of like not only consuming information and letting it slide, but simply being able to sit with it and understand it and resonate with it in a way.
Yeah.
So I really commend you for that, and it's so cool that it's like in the perspective of Africa as well.
Yeah.
And I'm excited. I'll be one of their first customers. Okay,
Yes.
I'm gonna have that in my coffee table.
Yes.
And I think that's beautiful. And like I said, I commend you for like wanting to pivot away from that conditional path everyone's going down with social media nowadays. And at the same time, you're starting a little bit of a movement. You're trying to tell people, even if there's going to be people who it's not for, they might still be
Yeah.
interested and still gravitate towards it, and that could start
Absolutely.
something, you know.
Yeah,
So
yeah, yeah,
I'm really
absolutely.
glad.
I want the return to print movement. I think I've
Yes.
been advocating it for for a long time. I
Yeah.
think just there's something to be said about being able to sit down, pick up a book, and just read it and
Most
immerse
definitely.
yourself. And I grew up reading. I mean, I also grew up with very strict parents who didn't let me watch TV, so I didn't have any other choice.
Yeah.
But I grew up reading, and the best memories that I have are being immersed in a book, and,
Hmm.
the stories that my mind would create and the places that my
I
mind would
love
take
that.
me just through words, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And I just think that there is something to be said about being able to sit down and just immerse yourself in a different world. And that is
Hmm.
really what we aim to curate with Afrique Noire Magazine is, sitting down and opening it up and just immersing yourself in the craft and the art of African creatives,
Hmm.
and the beautiful photos, of course, and then
Right.
reading about their stories and, reading the interviews and just like going to a different place. And I think that is what we're trying to advocate for. There is a little bit of advocacy in there as well of just,
Of course.
in
Yeah.
a world that's so digital focused and in a world
Hmm.
where everything is just like this and people are producing and everyone's trying to
Right.
get your attention. It's like, how do you step away from that and bring your attention to something else and let
Hmm.
it sit there and let it rest there? And I think it's hard. It is hard. I remember when I was trying to digitally detox, and this is coming from someone who could. I used to read like 500-page books in one day, and I would not stop, and I would just like go hours. And TikTok happened, and social media happened. I
Of
remember the first
course.
time I was trying to read a book. I think it was like 300 and something pages, and I kept itching to grab for my phone, and I
Mm.
was like, "What is this?" And I've
Yeah.
noticed that it's like now I have to intentionally force myself. I have a Kindle now, but I have to intentionally force myself to like sit and read, right? Like it's harder. And I just think about, the future generations, and I think about our kids and their kids, and it's like, are we not going to have people that read anymore, that like sit down
Yeah.
and actually read books? And
Yeah. For
because
sure.
everything is so online and everything is so digital and everything is so fast, and people want to
Hmm.
learn things in 30 seconds, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So that is also part of the movement that
No,
my
I
team
love
and I
it.
are on, is just,
Yeah.
going back to that, because I think it's important, and I think there's something to be said about having that experience,
For sure.
versus just being online. Yeah.
Yeah. No, I love that. I think like for me personally, like I growing up, like I saw reading as more of a punishment, if anything. Like, oh, you're on your phone,
Mm.
here's a book, you know? And I kind of always conditioned reading or just like sitting through long form
Same.
content or being educated in any way, shape, or form as like something so boring and so long. But then I went to
Mm.
university, of course, and started studying things that I was passionate about and I wanted to
Yeah.
learn more about it in any way that I could. But even with social media, it was a little difficult because I kept finding myself like wanting to also like reach for my phone every 5 minutes. But after I graduated in May, I was like, I need to get on reading books because
Yeah.
like I have so many good like I have like skills that I really want to develop essentially, especially like speaking and like comprehension and analytical skills, especially critical thinking skills. And I just started picking up like books and I literally read through like a trilogy in the summer, like a fantasy. And you know how
Yeah,
thick fantasy
amazing.
be. Fantasy be
Yes.
thick, and I really enjoyed it, and I found it so
Hmm.
beautiful to the point where it's like I dread going on my phone unless it's like for
Yeah.
the sake of my podcast. And like I'm so glad
Yeah.
that I was able to like do that, because now it's like allowing me to look at other forms of other long form content essentially and educate myself through that, rather than sitting through and short circuiting my brain with these
Yeah.
short form content. So I commend you once
Yeah.
again for going down that path, and I really hope people will understand that, and it will also allow them and push them to explore reading or just sitting through something with something, and being able
Yeah.
to digest it as well.
Yeah.
But yeah, so when I scroll through Afrique Noire on Instagram, I it feels like a love letter to our textures, history, beauty, creativity, and a lot of people in the diaspora kind of grew up without seeing themselves, like you mentioned, growing up in Southern California, and it almost feels like a new kind of archive, right? So, how would you describe the soul or heartbeat of Afrique Noire, and what deeper story are you trying to tell through the visuals and voices that you spotlight?
Yeah, it's a beautiful question. And I always throw this question to my team.
Yeah.
In our team meetings, I'm like, what do you guys think? Like, what do you
Mm-hmm.
see? Or if we ever bring in somebody, and
Yeah.
we're doing interviews, and that's always my question, because I think when you're so in something and you are, the one that's curating and you're the one that's deciding what's going, it's hard to like take a step back and think, what do other people see, right?
Of
Like, what do other
course.
people experience?
Yeah.
But I will say, at the heart of what we're trying to create, is connection and it's reverence, I think.
Mm.
And I feel like the people that I've spoken to that have experienced noir, or people that comment or DM us, or
Mm-hmm.
send us an email, that is also what they feel. So I'm like,
Yeah.
okay, at least, the we're doing well in what we aimed to do.
Mm-hmm.
But I mean, it's so layered, right? We show craftsmanship, right? We
Mm-hmm.
show people making things by hand, artisans, creating beautiful pieces that take
Right.
so much time and effort. A huge part of our ethos is also sustainability.
Mm-hmm.
So how, do artisans, cultivate sustainability in everything that they're doing, and
Yeah.
how can other countries and other places mimic that, right?
Of
Like, I think we're
course.
definitely moving to an era where people are more they're more interested in sustainable things. And I think if we think about where the world is going and everything that's
Mm-hmm.
happening environmentally,
Right.
sustainability is at the core of what we need to do now to protect our future.
Of course.
So that's something that's a huge ethos for us as well.
Mm-hmm.
We also, talk a lot about the collective spirit of being African.
Yep.
So
Mm-hmm.
if people come on the page, whether they're African or whether they're not African, or if they're diaspora that feel far removed from,
Mm.
Africa, there's still the sense of seeing yourself, right? Like seeing yourself represented
Of
in
course. Yeah.
different ways. So I think there's many layers, but I will say at the heart of it, I think it is reverence of the
Mm-hmm.
beauty of our culture and the beauty of our people.
Mm-hmm.
And what the continent is doing right now and what everyone on the continent is doing. And I think it's beautiful to just get a peek, and I feel like we're the window almost where people can look through and see, wow, this
Yeah.
is all of the beauty and amazing things that are happening in Africa. So
Mm-hmm.
yeah.
No, that's great. And I love how like your audience is like not catered to just like people on the ground back home or like people
Yeah.
here. It's,
Hmm.
whatever being African means to you, it is for you, I think.
Yes,
And
exactly.
that's what I find really beautiful about your page. Like anyone, maybe someone who is disconnected from their roots from through
Yes.
generations, something they couldn't control, they still consider themselves African and they want to learn about,
Yeah.
their ancestors. They can go on your page.
Yes.
Someone who came here like yourself when they were really relatively young and they're trying to navigate
Hmm.
this new world but still feel connected back home, it's also for them. Someone who was born
Yeah.
here and see that their parents come from another country and they see the art in their
Hmm.
house, they see the languages they speak, the food they eat, they also want
Hmm.
to feel connected. So it's so
Yeah.
nuanced, and I think
Yeah, it
that's like
is.
really beautiful about
Yeah.
what you have
Yeah.
created.
Absolutely. And I think, I always talk about this invisible string that I think connects, Black people.
Of course.
And I feel like Afrique Noire in the way that we've created it is really an act of remembering.
Yeah.
Because I do feel like, I mean, even for me, like I said, I came here when I was so young. I, was in many ways conditioned. I feel very American, right? Like if
Yeah.
I'm talking to my family back home, they're like, I'm American by all standards.
Yeah.
But I still have, and I've always had this deep, innate longing and feeling and connection to my home.
Mm-hmm.
And it's hard to put it into words, right? And I think a lot of people that I've spoken to, whether they were born here, whether they were not born here, whether they're, are their ancestors were slaves and, their families have been here for hundreds of years,
Mm-hmm.
there is always this invisible string that I feel like connects all of us. And I
Most
think we're
definitely.
seeing that play out now in a
Mm-hmm.
way that's like, okay, it can't be ignored, where
Yeah.
you have, African Americans going back to Africa, right? And
Mm-hmm.
I know a lot of people make fun of it or they think it's like
It's
funny, but
beautiful.
I think it's so beautiful, and like I am so here for it, and it's
Yeah.
not, there's, I know there's diaspora wars and all of the things. I don't pay attention to
Unfortunately.
any of that because I think it's just stupid. I know, I
It's
think it's the most
distracting.
stupid thing ever.
There's
Like
no,
I,
it's such a dense, like,
it is.
yeah.
I don't even pay any attention to it.
Yeah.
But I think if you look deeper and you see how beautiful it is. And I grew up around a lot of African Americans as well
Of
later on
course.
in life and high school and college. And I
Mm-hmm.
think if you look back at how deeply, moving it is to see people return to their home, right? Like the very places where their ancestors were taken so many years ago,
Mm-hmm.
and if you think about, I mean, slavery was a very long time, but if you just think about, how long the world has existed and how long we have existed as a continent, as a people,
Mm-hmm.
more of their ancestors were in Africa than were not, right? So if you
Yeah.
think about that connection and if you think about being uprooted, because that's what it was, right? Slavery was an uprooted, like folks were uprooted from their homes and their land and their family, and
Mm-hmm.
then they were forced to,
Yeah.
live and work and, like do all of these things in a different space, and then their children and children's children's were a product of that trauma. So if you
Mm-hmm.
think about how beautiful it would be to like return back to a place your ancestors were not able to go back to because they physically could not,
Mm-hmm.
I think it's so beautiful. And I love when diaspora or African Americans or Afro Europeans, whoever it is, they look at our work and they like feel something. And I think that's what art is, right? You might not be
Mm-hmm.
able to put it into words. You might not
Mm-hmm.
be able to say, this is what I'm feeling, but there is a remembering, there's an aching inside a lot of people to feel connected to their home and connected to their roots. And I
Right.
think art in many ways helps kind of define that a little bit or helps bring
Mm-hmm.
that out in way words can't, right? Words are so, like they're just words. I feel
It's
like
too
there's only
much.
so much, yeah, there's only so much you could say to
Yeah.
describe how you're feeling. But my hope is that, like, in seeing other creatives, use, art to tell the stories of their souls, other
Mm-hmm.
people can also feel that.
Yeah.
And I think it's beautiful. Like I love it. I love everyone going back to Africa. I'm like, yes, like please go, like have the experience.
Yeah, for
Be
sure.
back on the land that your ancestors used to walk. Like
Mm-hmm.
I love it. Yeah, I love it.
Yeah, no, I love it too. And like you said, those diaspora wars make no sense to me. I will never be able to comprehend it, but don't pay no mind either.
Yeah,
But
I
it is
don't
such
pay
a
any
beautiful
attention to
thing. It
them.
is such a beautiful thing. But no, you just made me think about art so differently. I feel like we think of communication as writing and speaking, but things can communicate to you as well, like art. Like there's like a painting behind me of like an African woman, and like when I have like friends come over in my house and they like see that, it like they don't have to say anything, but I can tell it makes them feel maybe a certain way. And that could be maybe
Yeah.
they're from like the islands, the Caribbean islands. Maybe they're from like back home and maybe they're from here. But art also speaks to you in
Hmm.
ways that you can't understand. And it just made me realize like sometimes, like, if I can't explain something through writing it down or just saying it, I'll try to. It's like maybe I should try recreating it in a form of art, and
Yeah.
it'll be just
Yeah.
as productive, so you made me think
Yeah.
about that in an interesting
Yeah.
way, which I love.
Yeah. No,
um
absolutely. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. But yeah, so platforms that celebrate blackness and Africanness, often they often face a lot of difficulty or hurdles that people never really see. I tend to see a lot of platforms that are created based off of this, and they don't, survive for a long period of time. That could be for multiple reasons, right? But there could be lack of funding, support, or some people just don't see the vision, or you
Mhm.
doubt yourself to the point where you just completely stop. What were some of the
Mhm.
struggles you faced in the early stages of building Afrique Noire, whether it was creative, financial, or emotional? And how did you push through the moments when the mission felt really heavy? And
Mhm.
how did you manage to go over those hurdles and keep it sustaining, especially something that is like unconventional, which is why I love like bringing on guests, because you hear about people starting businesses or starting some sort of like a, thing of their own, but they don't
Yeah.
talk about what they have gone through, because it's not easy, right? And it's not
Yeah.
conventional. It's not something where you're getting a paycheck every single month or every single
Mhm.
week or bi-weekly. It's a process. So could you walk us through that, and talk about how that experience was for you?
Yeah, absolutely. And, I thankfully haven't experienced too many hurdles. I will
Yeah,
say that.
yeah.
But I think, when I was starting off, I think I'm somebody that's aware of myself. I have a lot of self awareness, so I know what I'm good at and I know what I'm not good at.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and I always tell this story because it's very funny. And I always tell people, if you ever have the time, scroll all the way down to the very first like 5, 6 posts that Afrique Noir ever posted.
Mm-hmm.
And then compare that to where we are now. And you will
Yeah.
be able to tell that I was the one doing the graphic design in the beginning and I'm not
Yeah.
anymore.
Right, right.
Because I'm not a graphic designer, right? But I
Yeah.
took a leap of faith and I was like, you know what? This is what I want to do. How am I going to do it? I don't know. But,
Mm-hmm.
I love the quote is, I'm going to butcher it, but essentially it's like, as you walk the path, the way, as you walk the way will appear. I think that's the
Yes.
quote. And that's exactly how it was for me. I kind of had to start, and then as I started, the path then started to appear. People reached out to me. They wanted to, collaborate, or people were like, "Oh, I'm a social media manager. I'm a graphic designer," and I knew I definitely wanted to hire from the continent because I hadn't lived in Africa in so long. So I just
Mm-hmm.
wasn't able to. I felt like I wouldn't be able to tell the true and authentic stories in a way that somebody that was currently living on the continent could.
Right.
So essentially, sorry, can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Okay, okay, awesome. I like froze for a second. So essentially, I, hired quick and I hired well.
Mm-hmm.
And my team has been the one to really help support our growth and support our mission as we moved forward. But outside of that, there weren't too many hurdles that I faced yet.
Yeah.
I think we're still growing. I'm sure more things will come along the way. But I think having a
Mm-hmm.
strong team that's willing to support you and back you and be there for you is really helpful in any kind of endeavor.
Yeah, I think it's beautiful. And one thing that you mentioned, that actually, as you're actively speaking, I'm trying to go to the really bottom of your Instagram. But I was gonna say one thing that you mentioned is like it's so important to just start. I think like as soon as you just start, everything will just like work, work
Yeah.
out in its way. And especially if it's something that's you're kind of like a pioneer in, or is very niche, like it's going to attract a lot of people, and they're going to find it, just as moving as you felt
Mhm.
starting it. And I think that's the same experience I had myself. I started my podcast not knowing what I was doing, how it was
Yeah.
going to go, doubted
Yeah.
myself a lot of times, but then views started slowly kicking in. I started having people sending me messages as well. I started having people reach out to me asking to be on the podcast and talking
Ah,
about
yeah.
what things that they have built, right? So I think it's
Mhm.
definitely a process. It's not meant to be like quick, and it's not meant to you're not meant to see results right away. And I think that's
No.
like the beauty of it, right? And it kind
Yeah.
of like
Yeah.
humbles you as you go along, and it allows you to be more intentional with what you want to put out moving forward. And you think about your audience a lot more. You get to know your audience a lot more. I think in a
Yes.
digital age where like we constantly want that like instant gratification,
Exactly. Yeah.
we kind of don't want to sit through the the hard
The
part of it,
yeah,
you
the
know?
hard parts, yeah.
Yeah.
And a
And it's like
lot
the
of it is
best. Yeah.
hard and it's
Mm-hmm.
mundane, right?
Oh
Like
yeah.
it's
Yeah.
going through the same thing over and over and over again. Every
Yeah.
week, our team meets, we figure
Mm-hmm.
out which creatives we're going to feature, and it's very mundane. The things are
Mm-hmm.
happening over and over again. And I think in terms of the world that we're in today and everyone, shows you the end result, I think. So people come and they're like, oh, I created this app or I have this business and now I'm a millionaire, right? But it's
Yeah.
like nobody
Yeah.
shows you the beginning and the work and the repetition and everything that it took
Mm-hmm.
to get there. And for me, I don't have if you were to ask me today, I would say even if tomorrow we had to for some reason stop noir, I do feel like it was successful. And I wouldn't say that it was
Mm.
successful because it brought in so much revenue. But I think,
It's not about the numbers, yeah.
it's not, it's for me, it's not. And obviously, I understand the importance of having a sustainable business because I want to be able to
Mm-hmm.
pay my team well and I want us to grow. And that
Mm-hmm.
ultimately is the goal. But I also feel like things like that take a lot of time.
Mm-hmm.
And as long as you're willing to invest the time and energy to sit through and really work through the hard times and work
Mm-hmm.
through the days where you're like, is this worth it? Is it not worth it? And
Mm-hmm.
as long as this is something that you're passionate about, I
Of
feel
course.
like you just have to keep going, right? You have no
Yeah.
choice but to keep going.
Yeah.
And I don't foresee us stopping anytime soon, but like I said, even if we were to stop,
Mm-hmm.
the connections that we've made, the stories that we've told, the people that we've supported, the creatives that we've
Mm-hmm.
given light to, the people DM us like, thank you so much for featuring me, I've gained this many new followers, people have bought my
Oh,
art,
yeah.
all of these things, I'm like, okay, like this is great. If it ended tomorrow, I'd be like, okay, awesome. What's next? Like what else am I
Mm-hmm.
supposed to be doing? Like, how else can I continue to, pour into a business, whether it's mine or somebody else's? Like, I'm very open
Yeah.
to wherever this journey takes me. And I think
Yeah.
that's the beauty of it. So I don't put pressure on my team to perform. Like, it just
Mm-hmm.
so happens that we grew very quickly, but that wasn't even
Yeah.
truly the goal.
Yeah.
So I don't put this pressure for us to perform, for us to like, make millions of dollars overnight or, sell, sell, sell. Like that's not really the
Mm-hmm.
purpose. As we grow and as revenue comes, it's great. And, we work toward that, but it's never something that's at the forefront of our minds. And I
Yeah.
think that's also what makes the business, the feeling of the business the way that it is that we're
Yeah.
not trying to be something we're not very quickly.
Yeah.
So,
No, I love that. I think it's just something that you have to like be very open-minded about and just go with the flow with. I've been taking the time to do that as well with my podcast, but we'll see where everything goes. But I'm glad that you guys are doing that, especially with something like art. It's really good to kind of just like sit with things and take your time with it and allow things to come and go. But I'm glad that like, something that you said stuck with me was like regardless of, the numbers, the fact even if you were to stop like today, like you think it was really successful. And I think that
yeah.
really goes to show how passionate you are about it. And I know that even if it was to stop, like you would do something just as impactful for the continent in another context, right? That
Yeah.
passion is really important and really rare to find, especially in a world that everything seems so performative and people are doing things for their own gain and benefit. It's really refreshing to see that. So I, like I said a million times, but I commend you for that as well.
Thank you.
Now, for a lot of people in the diaspora, and myself included, when we see a platform that finally represents us, it feels grounding. It's like you find something that we didn't know was like missing from a part of us. And creatives, and for the creatives who are on the continent, being seen and in a dignified and intentional way can be incredibly validated, especially considering the many things we were talking about earlier, like those charity commercials or how we've been portrayed, through our education system in the West. Now that Afrique Noire has grown, right? I believe your platform currently sits on, well, your Instagram sits on 61,000 followers. What impact do you feel it has created on African creatives, the diaspora, or even on your own understanding of African identity? You did mention that you had people reaching out to you, you know, saying that they're really grateful for what you have done and that it's kind of like a snowball effect. You put
Yeah.
them on your platform and then they're getting these followers. People are supporting their businesses in a way that's validating them. They're probably putting food on the table for their families and things of that sort. But you can go into depth a little bit more with that if you'd like.
Yeah. I mean, that's a huge part of it, right? Is the actual creatives that we feature, and it's fun because we'll have creatives who are maybe starting out and they're like, hey, like I'm just starting out, but just know that in a few months or in a year, you're gonna post me on your page. Like,
Yeah,
it's that energy of like I'm going to be on this page, I'm going to be featured here, and I'm gonna work toward it. And it's like there is something and somewhere now where they know that they can be, right? Like they're like,
exactly.
if I do this, if I work hard, there's a space that will actually, showcase my art, and a platform that will actually, reward me in a way for like all of the work that I've been doing. Whereas before, I think, a huge thing that I talk about when I talk about Africa and when I talk about the African creative economy is infrastructure.
Yeah.
In the United States and, in the West, there's a lot of infrastructure for creatives, right? If you're a model, you can be on the cover of these magazines, you can like, there's infrastructure that can help you be where you want to be in your creative
Of
field.
course.
If
Yeah.
you're an actor, it's the same way. If you're a photographer, if you're a singer, right? And it's almost like even now in Africa, when we have artists and we have creatives, the infrastructure that they're trying to build on is Western infrastructure, right? Like they want to go to the Grammys, they want to go to be featured in Vogue, like things like that.
Yeah.
So my idea and my creation of noir is really, and that's why when I say I'm not really pressed about us making it tomorrow, is because this
Yeah.
is it's a long game for me.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's about creating long-term infrastructure.
Yeah.
Vogue didn't become Vogue overnight, right? You
Of
become
course.
you
Yeah.
become infrastructure over years and years
Mm-hmm.
of creating the space and uplifting the creatives and the artists that
Yeah.
deserve to be there.
Yeah.
And I want, African creatives in the way that they're saying now, like, I want to be featured in noir. Like, I want to, because they know that there's infrastructure here for them. There's a space
Exactly.
for them to
Yep.
be shown and spotlighted and seen.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't think every single African creative should be vying to be in a Western platform. Like, why do we not have our own platform that's
Yeah.
dedicated to African creatives? And I've heard people
Thank
talk
you.
about it, like, why don't we have the African Grammys, or why don't we have, and I'm only saying this in relation to the Grammys. It should not be called the Grammys or the African Grammys, right? It should be called something else.
No,
But
I
like,
understand. Yeah.
like, why don't we have that kind of
For sure.
infrastructure that supports African creatives? I mean, the African creative economy is a booming industry, and
Mm-hmm.
other countries and other continents have taken advantage of their creative economy. If you look at the
Yeah.
United States, the creative economy here is what really fuels a lot of our capital, right? Like you
Mm-hmm.
have actors, you have, the movies, you have so many different
The
layers of,
music.
of music, right? Like, and it brings capital, but it also brings a sense of joy. It brings a sense
Yes.
of, people, a sense of status. People know that they can work their way up and be featured in
Mm-hmm.
Vogue. They can work their way up and get a Grammy. They can work their
Mm-hmm.
way up and get an Oscar. There's reward for the work that they're doing.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's the infrastructure that I'm trying to create with Afrique
Yeah.
Noire, is that there can be reward for the work that you're doing. And the
Yeah.
work that you're doing is just as important, as
Mm-hmm.
somebody building a fintech company. Like, I'm sorry, as you can see, I'm not anti-STEM, but I definitely feel like, the push has always been, very tech heavy, very,
Yes.
which is fine. Like, I think tech is great. I think tech is a great advancement. Do
Mm-hmm.
I think that, Africans should just be focused on artificial intelligence now? I don't, right? Like,
Mm-mm.
I do feel like, and it's always this conversation about a return to tangible things. Like,
Of course.
art is something that's tangible. Art is something that actually affects people in a way that
Mm-hmm.
ChatGPT doesn't affect people.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so
Tell
how
me
do
about
we
it.
start creating space and
Yeah.
infrastructure
Mm-hmm.
for people that are doing the things that move a nation, right?
Most
People that are
definitely.
telling stories, people that are creating beautiful things, even in just fashion or design or photography or art. So that is my focus, and that is what we focus on, with Noir, and everything that we're creating and things that will come out later are all a part of that vision of creating infrastructure that will
Mm-hmm.
uphold creatives and something for them to look forward to, so they know that their art is not just lost or in vain,
Yeah.
right? Like, there are platforms and there are people who want to see the art that you're creating, so keep creating it. There are
Mm-hmm.
people that will reward you and, buy your art and uplift you and give you a platform because what you're doing is important and what you're doing matters. So
Mm-hmm.
that is, I guess, also back to your question of the soul of Afrique Noire, is really, we're here to amplify and uplift African creatives in all
Right.
forms, and we're here to show them that they don't need to go elsewhere to receive that praise.
Most
We're here to
definitely.
create it for Africans. So,
Yeah.
yeah.
I think that's so important. That's a discussion that I tend to have with those around me and on my podcast a couple of times. But I think it's so important that there's this strive for like go to the West, go to school in the West, get a job in the West. And I get it because like if you think about it, especially, you know, in a lot of African countries, they have not been independent for so long and they're still trying to rebuild from the repercussions of colonialism, and there's a lot
Yeah.
at stake, and people kind of just want to chase what's happening in Europe or in the West to the point where it even takes over their like form of creativity.
Yeah.
And I think it's really great that you're trying to create that infrastructure. That's a really, really intelligent way you put it. And yeah, so they have something to look forward to. So they feel like that they don't have to rely on like going to the Oscars or the Grammys or being on
Yeah.
Vogue, right? There's like another
Yeah.
outlet for Africans, and I cannot
Yes.
wait to
Yes.
see, like in like 5 years, someone's like, I made it on Afrique Noire, and this is at the top of my resume.
Yeah.
I think that
Mhm.
will be so rewarding for so many people. Having something that represents the continent and where they're from, and not just something that's like so Western heavy.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
but yeah, that's amazing. Now, my last question is Africa. It is evolving so fast. I know within the next couple of years, more than 60% of the world's youth are going to be, located in Africa. And many Gen Z Africans are reshaping the culture, fashion, entrepreneurship, the way the world sees us, like you're doing yourself. And platforms like yours are, heavily a part of that transformation, right? Now, when you look ahead a few years from now, I know you talked about infrastructure a little bit. What do you envision Afrique Noire becoming? And what new stories, mediums, or frontiers are you excited to explore next? Is there a project coming up that you would like to share with the audience? I know we spoke about this a little bit on the phone as well. So tell us about
Mhm.
that, and what your vision for all of this is.
I feel like my vision is always evolving, right?
Yes.
Initially my vision was just to have, an Instagram page, and then, that developed to a magazine, and, now we're moving through the stages. But as I think about the future, like I said, thinking about infrastructure, I think, Afrique Noire being the hub and the space for African creatives in all formats,
Mm,
and being the platform that really highlights creatives and gives creatives opportunities, right?
of
Because a huge
course.
part of it is about creating that space and creating opportunities for them
Yes.
to feel like the work that they're doing has merit, and that
Mm-hmm.
this is something that they can actually do. They can follow their soul's purpose.
Mm-hmm.
And it's funny because our next issue is coming out soon. The date
I'm
to
excited.
be announced, and it's called The Artist Dilemma. So this is our homage to artists who are creating despite this push and pull,
I
right?
love that.
This,
Yeah.
should I go after, something you and I were talking about earlier,
Yeah.
should I go after my dreams, and should I pursue where I feel like my soul is calling me to? Or should I go to where the money is, right? Should
Yeah.
I go to where I can actually make money and provide for myself and my family? And
Mm-hmm.
it's such this is an issue everywhere. So,
Of
even
course.
in the magazine issue, we talk about it universally. But I think in Africa, it's more pronounced because there's this, like I said, a lot of our countries are young. We don't have a lot of infrastructure for
Mm-hmm.
our people. So when we talk about art, sometimes people look at us and we're like, why are you talking about art? Like we need to, do this and do that. We need to make money. We need to, like, there's always this like energy, and it's rightfully so. I'm not going to, like, I think I sit at a place of privilege to be like, I can
Mm-hmm.
pursue my art, right?
Yes,
Like I can
yes.
do that, and a lot of people don't have that same privilege.
Mm-hmm.
So when we think about, the artist dilemma, and you'll explore it in the issue when you receive it, it's this idea of how can we give artists the platform, and how can we support art
Mm-hmm.
globally, and
Yeah.
that also looks like in policy,
Yeah.
right? Like if you think about the United States, there's lots of policy around creatives,
Of
right? And
course. Yeah.
there's and I want the same thing for, Africa, and I want the same thing for African countries, is how do we embed creativity into the
Mm-hmm.
very fabric of, our policies and the work that we're doing.
Yeah.
And I think it's a longer conversation, but one that's,
For
being
sure.
had, with, things like Lagos Fashion Week and Dakar Fashion Week,
Mm-hmm.
and,
Mm-hmm.
different, there's conversations now about the African creative economy
Mm-hmm.
at the forefront. Whereas, and I think there's always been conversations. This is not new. I'm kind of
Of
just
course. Yeah.
hopping on a train that's already been in
Yeah.
motion. But I think it's important to think about, as much as we think about tech and finance and money and capitalism and all of those things, I think it's important for us to also think about creativity and art and
Mm-hmm.
wonder, and think about how that affects a nation, and how that affects a person at their core and their
Most
soul.
definitely.
And, art has always been around, it's not new.
Mm-hmm.
But the way that we perceive art, I think, has changed because we now live in such a capitalistic world,
Mm-hmm.
truly, that's
Yep.
pushing for, no, you need to do something that makes you money because you need to be rich. But
Yes.
it's like, to what end? So that's when I think about noir, and when I think about our future, that's what I really think about. I think
Mm-hmm.
about us really promoting creativity in Africa in all
For sure.
aspects.
Yeah.
And as for what we have coming up, we have a lot of exciting things coming up.
Mm-hmm.
Next year, we are launching Afrique Noire Edit, which is our incubator program for African fashion designers, which is very
Oh,
exciting.
that's so cool.
Yeah, so we will be partnering. Each new collection that we drop within this incubator will be partnering with a new African designer. So, I mean, I think, I'm not sure how much you know about African fashion, but it's very hard to,
Mm-hmm.
launch your own fashion line or create your own
Yeah.
collection, just because it's expensive. And a lot of the fashion designers we have, the more prominent fashion designers, are actually diaspora that have gone back. And
Yeah.
um,
Interesting.
so
Yeah.
we're trying to think about how can we continue to foster an environment where we can support, creatives, whether it's
Mm-hmm.
financially or it's giving them a platform.
Yes.
So the edit will be out next year. We have our first designer that we're partnering with. She's currently making a very beautiful collection.
Wow.
And then the goal is that every new collection will have a new creative to introduce to our audience and introduce to
Mm-hmm.
the world, and help them, get their foot in the door
Yeah.
of fashion design. So it's very exciting. Our next issue, like I said, the Artist Dilemma is coming out. We also have some merch that we're dropping soon. So lots of exciting things coming
Yeah.
from our end, and our team has been working really, really hard. Like I said, everything we produce with intention. I mean, we've been around for
Mm-hmm.
like 2 years now. Everyone's been like, "Where's your merch?" I'm like, I don't want to just create a T-shirt that says Noir, right? Like we
Yeah,
want it
I
to be
understand.
intentional. So our merch will be just as intentional as
Of
our
course.
magazine. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I am so excited for what's to come. I will definitely be staying posted and I will be checking in every now and then. And for those who are listening, if you want to check out Afrique Noire's website or Instagram page, everything will be linked in the show notes if you're listening audio only, or if you're watching via YouTube, will also be in the description box. And I cannot wait for everyone to go and see the amazing things that you are doing. I should thank you so much for joining me on today's episode of They Lied About Africa. You have inspired me so much, have given me a lot to think about, and I cannot wait to see, like I said again, where all of this goes. And I commend you for everything that you are doing. It is not easy, right? To do something that is considered the, I don't want to say abnormal, but it's just like unconventional. Once again, I think it's like sometimes a little difficult at times to like try to pursue some sort of a passion in an unconventional way. But the fact that you have started it, you know, is an achievement in and of itself already. And the fact that you are, even though you have left Gambia at such a young age and you came to the United States and you somehow established your life here, are willing to still build the life based on where you came from. That's also something very commendable of, and I'm so excited to see what's to come of you. And I hope a lot of people are able to take away so many beautiful lessons about art, about what it is to be African, about African narratives, where to get your media from, and things of that sort. And I know you're going to inspire so many people. Like I said, feel inspired already. But yeah, thank you so much for coming on this episode. I really
Thank you.
appreciate it.
Thank you so much for having me, and well done. We're also really excited to see all that you have to offer and continue to offer. And thank you for creating this space as well. I think it's really important. So
Of
thank
course,
you.
not a problem.
Okay.